This is PID Radio.
Gonna step up to the microphone, say it loud and clear. A better day is coming soon to get us out of here.
Welcome to PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert.
And I am Sharon Gilbert. And you know what? We have a guest in the bunker tonight that is just going to knock your socks off.
Your head may explode.
It may explode. Mine did.
Yes, mine did twice.
I know.
Yep. David
Clean
Flynn.
up in aisle 3.
Yep, a cryptoarchaeologist. Got some very interesting things to say about the mathematical correlation and significance of the Roswell UFO crash in 1947.
Oh, you're going to be running for the shelf and grabbing your old math books from high school.
This is the stuff that Mr. Grismer, your 6th grade geometry teacher, did not tell you would need to know someday out there in the real world.
Well, with no further ado here, let's go right to it.
We're pleased to have with us in the bunker by telephone from beautiful Montana a man whose work is best described as cryptoarchaeology, a guy who's done a lot of work with numbers and the significance thereof, David Flynn. David, thanks for joining us today on PID Radio.
Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome to the bunker, David.
We've got it. We got it nicely appointed today. Sharon's sitting there with our security chief Murphy on her lap. He's protecting her at the moment.
In fact, he's looking at my computer. I've got something up there about one of your articles, in fact, about Roswell and the numerical significance of the Roswell site. He's sitting there studying it.
Is Murphy a cat or a dog?
Murphy's a dog.
Yeah.
And he's the chief here, so if you hear barking, that's he's just trying to get in on the conversation.
We have a couple border collies here that guard our realm.
Oh, yeah?
Murphy goes undercover as a cat sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
he just jumped off my lap. He said, I am so tired of you talking to me like that.
Your article was in Raiders News Update a while back prior to the Ancient of Days conference in Roswell, which was over the 4th of July weekend, and the numerological significance of the 1947 crash at Roswell had never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that there was something more going on there than just something crashing in the desert, whether it was human or alien or whatever. How did you get interested in the crash, and where do you come down on the argument of whether this was a supernatural craft or something of human origin?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because it's one of the most fascinating, I think, contemporary history subjects you can look into nowadays. And I would think from a theological perspective, people should pay really close attention to it, because it seems to have, the influence of Roswell in our culture has been enormous, whether people are actually cognizant of that or not. They look into the birth of actual ufology. Mm-hmm. It seems to stem right from, a real American event, and that would be Roswell. But as far as actually getting involved in it, it's kind of amazing even to me. My father was a physician, and he worked in Montana for a number of years. And back in the 70s, we moved out to Helena, Montana. Mm-hmm. And it just happens to be the same hometown as Jesse Marcel Jr.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Jesse Marcel, the senior, Major Marcel, who actually recovered the debris for the Roswell crash.
From the famous photograph.
Yeah, and this is one of the only living witnesses now, Jesse Marcel Jr., who actually held in his hands some of this debris, to give you some description. He was only 11 at the time that he actually saw it, but now he isn't in Helena. I think he's a flight surgeon down in Afghanistan. But I've had talks with him, and he's been really forthcoming with information, and very articulate, very well-read, a medical doctor. And that was probably the first experience I've had with the Roswell event. My father had said, before I ever met Marcel or heard anything about the Roswell event, that there'd been this interesting fellow he met that was talking about UFOs and an actual down disk back in 1947. So I was intrigued from the beginning, and that was all the way back in the 70s. So that's where that all began for me.
So when did you begin to connect? Let me back up just a second. Second part of that question: where do you come down on the argument after the research you've done as to whether that whatever it was crashed, was it of supernatural or unearthly origin, or was it something that was a black budget military project?
Now, to break down what I think it was, it almost covers so many different aspects of let's say, a word of that would actually define all the aspects at once would be theurgy. When it comes to the esoteric nature of, let's say, what you would say occult fraternity philosophy, there's a lot of different groups that fit into that. It's a basic Gnostic idea of connecting with forces that are superior intelligently in heaven. Somehow by going through machinations or syncopations of rituals on earth that actually somehow connect us with the power above. And that would be the word that theurgy is trying to describe. I think the Roswell event was a theurgic working. And the actual theurgic workings by, say, Freemasonic elite would be a connection between time and space and measuring the Earth in some way. Geometry is probably the mainstay of the philosophy or the religion of the occult fraternity. And that is because in order to actually learn where you are on this Earth, you have to have a connection with heaven. So it symbolically becomes it's like a statement of what the theurgic working is. It's almost like alchemy, only it involves alchemy, and it also involves numerics and numerology and astrology and all these things that are pagan and ancient and a lot of times defined as sacred geometry. I'm looking at it from this viewpoint, but not because I'm morally aligned that way. As a Christian, I realize, what's actually written in the Bible as, law that says, these sort of practices are not, they're not allowed by God. They're against the law. Then there's 613 laws in the Old Testament, but these are part of the thou shalt not, do.
Yeah, God's pretty clear on using the stars for divination, yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, there's quite a bit of information that says that God, of course, is being the architect of the universe. Well, I shouldn't use that because that's actually an appellation that's used by Freemasonry for Lucifer.
Right.
But get back at
yeah, when you say God, you have to,
define your terms.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he is the creator of the universe. He's designed the universe. He set it all into motion, and he even talks about having set times and seasons as he's preordained certain times and seasons to have they fall in when he says they're going to fall, and things happen when he says they're going to happen according to this configuration he's set up in the heavens.
Right.
And so let's say when the Magi from the east came to they said they followed a star and they actually found the Messiah. They weren't turned away because they were idolaters. They were absolutely correct. Yep, the star led them to Bethlehem. They ended up finding the Messiah just like they understood they would. And there's an incredible biblical precedent for why they knew these sort of things. Historically, they understood because these men in Babylon had actually spent some time with some of the most learned and gifted prophets of antiquity, which had been in exile in Babylon before. Daniel, prophet Ezekiel, they were there in the actual court for a while as Magi themselves. So what they were doing is taking something that exists already in time and space, signatures that are already and obviously there, and cycles in the heavens that they can actually view. And if you look at from the pagan version of all these things. They were twisted and distorted and made to worship creatures and other people and other gods. And they weren't designed for that at all. They were designed to show God's dominion and power over time and space. And that's what it just says right in the beginning, in Genesis. He sets up, I guess the word is moed, times and season. He sets them up into motion. They're established in the beginning, and they continue to point out times and seasons in the future. So the Roswell event actually connects to that idea. Unfortunately, there is a evil side to spiritual hierarchies. There actually are forces, and this is a belief system that the Freemasons understand as being the dynamic power, the dynamo of what they're trying to connect with. They believe it's a force outside, even in the atmosphere of the Earth, that if they can connect with it, they can actually pull power down and become, in the actual end of all of their work, immortal in their own right. And the signature of these things always ends up going back into the Bible. You'll see the same numbers, you'll see the same motifs and patterns repeated, and it's just turning over what we see in the Bible into a Gnostic version of things. It's turned it over into, instead of a religion of faith, a religion of trust of God and actually listening to what he says and doing what he says because we trust him. It's an idea of, it's all about becoming powerful through knowledge and gaining as much knowledge as you possibly can, and to the point where you've actually moved through mortality into immortality. Yeah. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but getting back to Roswell again. When I started looking at this and its influence on culture, I realized that there was a spiritual component to it. And before I actually took a close look at Roswell, I'd been in studying eschatology and prophecy, especially about the second advent of Christ. And there's more prophecy surrounding the second advent of Christ than there is even the first. And it may be because of that the Jews in Jesus' times had rejected him, because they were looking so closely at these prophecies that said the Messiah will come and rule the earth, and all the world will be centered around Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be the ruling capital of the earth. And they're looking at this sort of thing while they're in, being occupied by the Romans, and they're saying, well, that's the kind of Messiah we want. You don't fit the bill.
And even the disciples, the disciples didn't even get that. I noticed. You see in Acts chapter 1, they're still asking 40 days after the crucifixion, are you going to restore the kingdom of Jerusalem now? So, yeah, they weren't alone. The ruling Jewish elite, even Jesus' disciples had a hard time grasping the concept.
It's astounding, too. Today, you're looking at almost the same situation that was going on in the time before Jesus was born. There were people who were looking at the prophecies of Daniel and saying, okay, well, here we actually have numbers of years that have been written that say, there's going to be a Messiah coming. There were experts in the law who were ready to see Jesus, the Messiah. I'm trying to think of the name of the high priest in the temple at the time he was
Caiaphas or Ananias?
Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest.
The one who actually, after he saw Jesus at his circumcision, says, now I can die contented. Well, he was waiting.
Oh, it was an old man when Jesus was going to go in and be...
Simeon? Was that it?
Simeon, I think it is Simeon.
Yeah, I think that's his name.
Yeah.
He knew. He'd spent his whole life as a scholar of the old, the three scrolls. I guess back then, the Torah was in one scroll. The extra writings like Psalms and Proverbs, and that was in another scroll, and then the writing of the prophets. And he was an expert in all of these, and especially the prophecies of Daniel. And it was just basic arithmetic. He could count from what Daniel was saying, the actual decree that went out to go build the Temple of Jerusalem and set the wall around it, which was set up by Cyrus the Great back in, 538 BC, after the Jews were let out of exile in Babylon. You just count forward the number of years that Daniel had actually written, and he was in the age, and he was expecting this to happen.
Yeah.
And so there's a time now where there's a lot of signs that people maybe have forgotten to look for, because we're still working with the same constructs that are in the Old Testament when it comes to what the Jews were expecting when Jesus first came. And we're still working with the same prophets and the same prophecies. And I became intrigued with looking for the same signatures in contemporary events, especially ones that seem to imprint themselves so strongly in our culture, in the cultural mind. Mm-hmm. And especially in the realm of the occult, which ufology invariably has taken many people into the realm, which I think it was designed for from the beginning. So then the number that stands out, I think, the most with the Roswell event is 33.
Okay. And now, where do you come up with the number 33 in the Roswell crash?
Now, it's in its latitude.
Okay.
The city of Roswell lies on the 33rd parallel, mm-hmm. which would be lines of latitude around the Earth. So you're moving out 0 from the equator and out north. On the poles, it's 90 degrees. So at the latitude of Roswell, it's 33. Mm-hmm. In any of the occult fraternities, the number 33 is the highest level you can attain as a degree of rank. And because they are all secret societies, they're all secret fraternal occult orders, it's kind of hard to actually pin down why that is.
I've heard one suggestion that it may represent the 1/3 of the angels that were swept out of heaven when Satan was thrown down.
Right.
Yeah, and that's your arithmetic working again. You
yeah. Also in the Hebrew,
of 100% is.
Yeah. Also in the Hebrew alphabet, the 11th letter, the meaning of it is like, as in it's a simile, likened to something, and of course the 22nd letter is Tav, which is the symbol for Christ. So likened to God.
Mm-hmm. When you add those numbers together,
adds up to 33.
Ooh, good one, honey.
Thanks, honey.
Yeah, what I found is there is a consistent explanation that seems to fall. It always points back to something, and it'll do it in a number of ways. I think what it ultimately points back to is this contest between, like you were saying, Derek, the 1/3 of an angelic realm that has rebelled, and you also see the number repeated in the actual age that Jesus Christ was during his crucifixion.
That's right. He was 33 when he was crucified. Yeah.
Yep.
And we know that because the law says a priest cannot begin his teaching until he's 30 years old.
Right.
That's right.
So the Messiah, of course, completing the law perfectly, would have to follow the letter of the law, the 613 laws. So you know he started it when he was 30, and then his ministry lasted for 3 years, or 3.33 years, when his resurrection occurred. Not only that, but the actual word of the place he was crucified, Golgotha, in Aramaic. If you look at that in Hebrew, it's Galgaleth, and it's spelled, I guess with the English equivalent, but there's no real vowels in Hebrew. There's some letters that kind of act as vowels, but anyway, it's GLGLT, or Gal, 2 G's and 2 L's, that if you add them separately, they equal 33. And
oh my gosh.
So altogether, they equal 66, but if you were saying the two words by themselves, gal, being a round rolling thing like a head, it would be 33 and 33. And then the real ancient Semitic script for T is exactly that shape. It's a cross.
Okay. All right.
So you even have the word of Golgotha symbolizing Calvary, symbolizing the place where the cross was on the hill. The number 33 repeating again, too. This is all something that, the higher echelons of the occult fraternity would know. Those are all the symbolic geometric secrets, the numerical secrets. They're ardent students of the Bible. They pay very close attention to the ancient languages that the Bible was put together in, because not only is every letter in Hebrew a sound, but it's also a number. Same with the Greek. And they realize this, and you can see that they actually employ this over and over again in their works and in their temple lodges and so on. So taking this understanding and looking at Roswell, you see the same signatures popping up, and 33 is probably the most apparent one. The 33rd parallel in America was also the site of the Trinity nuclear detonation, the first one we ever attempted. And when it was dropped, when the actual nuclear bomb was dropped in Hiroshima exists at, I believe, 34 degrees latitude.
Yeah, it's very close. Nagasaki's closer.
And Nagasaki is at 32. If you were to take and plot a line from Nagasaki to Hiroshima, and then split the line evenly in the center, you would actually hit 33.33.
Oh my goodness!
Exactly.
And we need to mention that Harry Truman was himself a 33rd degree Freemason
and a 33rd president.
Yes.
And I mean, it would have been a little bit too obvious, I think, if you'd have picked some city that was almost perfectly on the 33rd parallel.
Yeah, but also if you take the date of that we dropped the bomb August 6, 1945.
Yeah.
Those numbers add up to 33.
Oh, well, there you go. The pattern. Once you have the key and you understand, okay, well, these patterns are going to continue because there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been will be again. No one can say, look, here's a new thing. But a lot of people have forgotten what the old things are. And one of the most important points, I think, of this whole Roswell event is that it nails these ancient symbols. And it points to, again, something in our future, and a very close, I think, future, that connects to the same ideas that the Jews of ancient Jerusalem and ancient Israel were looking for when their Messiah was supposedly coming, according to the prophecies that they understood in the Old Testament. We're seeing the same sort of message, I think, only we're seeing it in a twisted way, in a Gnostic way, in a way that incorporates an idea of a spiritual hierarchy that isn't aligned with the Christian message, the gospel. It's completely diametrically opposed to it. It incorporates motifs from it, but it's turned it on its head so that you just end up with the basic Gnostic message of what happened on the cross. And I guess to cover that really quickly, it's not, the Gnostics do not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They believe he was an incarnation of Lucifer himself, and that he just symbolized man moving through another stage of evolution on his own merits.
Right.
His authority to become a god that was taken away from him by the demiurge, according to the Gnostic belief system, who they say is the jealous God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, you've twisted this around in the Gnostic view of this idea that Jesus really isn't who he said he was, and really didn't do what he said he was supposed to,
Yeah, it's the same old lie that's been handed to man since the garden. You can be as gods. And it's significant that very many of the contactees of what people believe to be aliens are given this very message, that these higher beings are here to help us transform or evolve into a new type of higher being ourselves.
Yeah, it's amazing when you actually and you look into those cults. Just as kind of an aside, well, I'd say the Zeta Reticulans. And then the person who's been channeling them, what's her name? Nancy Liedermeyer?
Is that the one who's doing, is it Ramtha?
Oh, that's J.C. Knight.
Okay, yeah, that's a different one, yeah.
And these people, they have a connection that they talk about the ascended masters who were here before the flood came, the worldwide deluge. They were teaching mankind, but we got too close to knowing our own divinity, and so the jealous demiurge destroyed the earth with the flood. And then they're talking about, well, that's happening again. We're going to get ready for this cycle to culminate once again. And that is the message of Roswell. That's what's being said, that there was a cycle that destroyed the earth in the past, and now we're coming back to it. And the Zeta Reticulans, they actually maintain in their title the same things that we were talking about when it comes to Jerusalem and 33 and the cross. a zeta in the Greek alphabet is a letter that looks exactly like a snake coiled up, rearing to strike. In fact, that's exactly what it was when it was made. It was the symbol of that actual configuration of a snake. A reticle is, in astronomy, the crosshairs of a telescope.
Right.
So you have a zeta on a reticle, you have a serpent on a cross.
The snake, okay.
Oh, my goodness.
And you have, the Messiah says, okay, just like the serpent was raised on the pole in the desert by Moses, I'll be raised on the cross too. Well, even today, you'll look at the symbol for, on the back of every ambulance, you'll see a serpent on a cross.
Right, the caduceus, right?
And it's a symbol of healing, which is exactly what that was when Jesus is alluding to the symbol that was raised in the desert by Moses. Unfortunately, as it seems to always happen, the Israelites started worshiping the symbol itself.
Right, exactly.
What it represented.
Yeah.
Which represented the Messiah. Same thing goes with the Zeta Reticuli thing. Instead of focusing on the symbols and understanding that they lead back to the Messiah, that they're a type or a shadow of the Messiah, and following back the shadow to the original, thing that it's representing, they don't. They just start worshiping the symbol itself. Roswell bears some of these sort of signatures.
Well, let's about the location and or the timing.
Yeah, the date itself, 1947.
1947. It's almost like Richard Hoagland says, time release aspirin. You don't get the understanding until you wait long enough in history after the event to really see just how profound it is and how much impact it's going to have on the culture and the mind of the thinking world. And 1947 is a signature of the tetrahedral geometry that he's been explaining as being on a place on Mars called Cydonia, that he says has artificial structures, that has they have continuity between them. There's a geometric pattern and actual design that mentions over and over again when it comes to the geometry internally and externally this 19.47 relationship. And as quickly as I can put this out, 19.47 is about tetrahedral geometry because, let's say you take a tetrahedron, it kind of looks like a pyramid. It's just a four-sided, the simplest four-sided shape you can have. It's the first platonic solid because you can't make anything with less sides than four. And you take four equilateral triangles and you kind of glue their edges together and you have a tetrahedron. If you put that inside a sphere, which is like the highest order of shapes you can have in platonic geometry, and put it so that it's like at either one of the vertices, one of the points of this tetrahedron is touching either the north or the south pole. The other three will be touching at either 19.47 below the equator or above the equator, depending on where you put the point. The pole.
Oh my goodness!
And that's tetrahedral geometry. That's where the 19.47 thing comes in. And then he goes on to say, Richard Hoagland goes on to say, that if you look at planets in our solar system, you'll invariably see an outwelling of power in some form from that latitude on the planet. Say that the great red spot on Jupiter is 19.47 degrees north latitude. There's a great blue spot on Neptune. It's at the same place. And the very largest volcano and largest mountain on our planet, which is covered by the Pacific Ocean, still rises high enough over the oceans, at the ocean level, to be a real prominent island, and that's Hawaii. That's precisely at 19.47 degrees.
Mauna Loa?
The main island.
Kilauea.
Yeah, and if you actually follow how deep, how tall this volcano is, it rivals Mount Everest. It comes from the very bottom of the Pacific Basin. And to explain why that's happening is something in geology you're not really going to get a very good one. But Hoagland says there's something about a tetrahedral configuration which causes energy in the cosmos to flow through certain patterns, and you can get pretty. There's a lot of studies that have been done in connection to his work, in physics, and they're pretty in depth and kind of hard to follow unless you're into physics or mathematics already. But when you look back at Roswell again and you see the date 1947, well, it's not exactly 19.47, but what I did was start taking a look at the relationships, the numbers that show up in the actual location and in the date and timing of the event had with each other. And like I was saying, you're looking at Roswell event as kind of a statement that there's a world ruler coming, in the same way that the Jews in Jesus' time were looking for a Messiah that would come and rule from Jerusalem. Well, what really stands out in all of this is that if you take that 19.47 number, you'll actually be able to combine it with some numbers that are pretty substantial when it comes to cycles in the heavens. And that would be precession. Precession is something that most people are completely unaware of, and especially Christians, because it's such a huge component to astrology.
Right, yeah.
And so to explain it, you have to kind of get into the realm of astrology a little bit. How you can understand precession is there's a line that goes across our skies that the planets seem to travel in, and the sun seems to travel in, and that's called the ecliptic. Because we're on this plane of orbit, all the planets are kind of on this relative plane of orbit, so it's like a flat, sort of like a plate, say, in the space, and we're all orbiting the sun on this plane. And so it looks as a line to us when we see the planets moving. And as we go around the sun, every year we'll actually arrive at the same point we were just a few minutes later than we did the year before. And the reason is perspective. The Earth actually is traveling around the sun at the same clip. The thing is that our orbit is inclined. It's called obliquity at about 23 degrees right now. And so we got this point of axis where we rotate, where north is, that's moving very slowly and kind of like a top that wobbles. And because it does this so slowly, it actually makes one complete wobble in 25,920 years. And because it's doing that, it appears that the sun is rising a little bit farther off every year at the same time along this ecliptic. So along the ecliptic are also the signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs. And it'll take 72 years for us to move 1 degree along the ecliptic. It'll take us 25,920 years to move a complete circuit around the ecliptic. So we'll move through the whole zodiac, the whole 12 signs, and they're actually cited as, according to astrology, the beginning of the year. You look in March 21st, and whatever the sun rises, that's the year we're in. Back in the 60s, the song
Age of Aquarius.
Dawning of Aquarius, that was a big deal, even though we're not exactly in Aquarius right now, according to astronomy or astrology. That's why they're saying we're at the dawning of it and that sort of thing. That age will actually occur probably more around the year 2012, if you really want to pin it down. So anyway, the thing that was really interesting about the Roswell numbers is, of course, 33 and the third, which is where this latitude is, where Roswell is, and not exactly where the crash site is. You can actually pin down the crash site at just a slightly different coordinate than 33 and a third. But what's really amazing about the whole area is that there are some universal mathematical constants that work into this, like precession, and the other real big one, and that's the number pi. Because the cycles in the heavens all seem to work on circles. And the one number that we understand, the only number that we understand so far, that actually somehow defines a circle is pi. And pi is just this number, 3.14159265. It goes on for
Well, it blew up that computer on Star Trek because you couldn't get to the last digit.
Yeah, you could say it goes on forever. I think after a couple thousand digits, it starts repeating, but some people want to argue with that. I'm not a mathematician, but I know it's a real big number, and if you actually, in pi, it's really simple. You don't have to worry about squaring anything. Basically, it is, if you know the diameter of a circle, that is, from one point to the other side of it, the very widest point of a circle, if you know how big it is, if you multiply that times pi, 3.1415, you'll end up with the circumference, how big it is around. And conversely, if you know the circumference, but you don't know that the diameter, you divide it by pi, and you get the diameter. And what happens at Roswell is, if you take the latitude of the Roswell impact site, where this disk supposedly landed in 1947, and you multiply it times pi, you get the longitude. 104. And the longitude is...
good old 104.
Yeah, 104. Now, that by itself, let's say if you were a scientist working for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with the radio dishes and so on, they're looking for something like this. They're looking for a intelligent signature in mathematics that is not dependent on a system of measurement. They call it a universal constant. With pi, let's say if I'm measuring inches to find out how big a circle is around, it's going to tell me. If I'm measuring in feet, it's still going to tell me. If I'm going to measure it in something completely arbitrary, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to get that in a relationship that works, because pi is a dimensionless constant. And according to SETI's reasoning, an intelligent extraterrestrial should have a grasp of a dimensionless constant, because they can communicate with these things mathematically, and they don't have to worry about the paradigm of thought or measurement or whatever from the other intelligent recipient. And that's embedded in the Roswell event. And it's been there since it happened. And it's really easy to overlook, and people say, well, it could be coincidence.
Coincidence, chance, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you would look at the number 33 and its absolute importance in the occult fraternities world, and its absolute importance in our own Judeo-Christian resource, the Bible, then you can't say that 33 has no significance. You can't dismiss the significance of pi. And if you've gone through any even grade school math, unless you didn't pay attention, unless one didn't pay attention, I should say. And you get to this idea of what happens when you use these numbers together, and that's where Roswell is, and it just happens to be the most significant UFO event in modern history. Maybe there's others that have happened and we didn't know about it, other crashes and so on, but this is the one that's most popular. This is the one that's kind of started the ball rolling, and it just happens to have occurred in 1947, which is another dimensionless constant.
Now, looking at a map that you provided with your article, and by the way, for people listening to the podcast, we are going to put links to the article and to some of the other things that we discuss in the show notes on the RSS feed, so that you can look these up and see the maps and so forth. And if you're listening to the enhanced podcast, which we'll record in the Apple MP4 format, I'll put the images into the file so that you can look at it if you're listening to this on iTunes. What convinced me that this wasn't just coincidence was the reported direction of the craft and the mathematical relationship that works out to the path that this craft took prior to its crash. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. There's a guy named Jim Hickman who I met in Roswell 2 years ago, and he was head of, I was going to see his card, he was head of UFO Skywatch International, I think that's the name of it. And he was connected with MUFON and NICAP. I think NICAP might have changed, but a big UFO watch group. And he had written an article that was talking about the contemporary history of the Roswell event and saying, it's kind of strange that people would dismiss it out of hand or say that, as the Air Force had supposedly come clean back in, was it 2001, where they said, no, that it was really, these were weather balloons that fell, and we were just testing how these balloons would drop crash dummies at high altitude, and they're basically like car crash dummies, and we wanted to see what would happen if you fell out of a balloon, and something that was really strange.
Yeah.
He said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Go back to the date that this happened and look at the actual Roswell paper, and there's an article where an eyewitness says they saw a luminous disk zoom right over their heads from the direction of, it came out of the southeast, and it was going roughly northwest, and it clipped the edge of the southwest of town. And they still go into the distance and disappear over the hill. There's also reports in the same newspaper that talk about how Radar Albuquerque had been tracing these bogies for up to 3 days.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that they were performing uncharacteristic flight maneuvers, non-conventional, like moving at 4,000 miles an hour and taking right-angle turns and that sort of thing. And this is listed also. There was a huge there's a huge United States UFO flap. A UFO flap is where you have multiple witnesses seeing things, aerial phenomena that's unexplained over a few days. And this is going on for a couple weeks prior to the Roswell event. And so people are primed when they see the headlines, the American Army has captured a downed disc. Well, they were wondering what these things were because they had a flap going on for weeks prior to this. So he's saying, looking at this history, you'll see that there was something happening and that the trajectory actually follows the line that I was talking about, because with the latitude multiplied times pi, and let's say the latitude of 33 degrees will start at, say, 33.00 minutes. Mm-hmm. Then 33 degrees, 0.59, where it will shift over to 34 degrees north latitude.
Okay. You
can draw a line from there, multiply 33 in each one of these instances times pi, and it'll be a line that has an angle, a rise over run on your map of around 40 degrees. But you can actually plot it going through the edge of Roswell, just like the report said, and terminating at about 34 degrees north.
So, and then it directly intersects the impact site where it crashed.
And it directly connects with the impact site. And it's a little dicey to try to figure out where that is. Because if you're a tourist in Roswell and you want to find the site, they've got 4 of them. And, somebody would be happy to take your money and drive you out to any of these places that they might have put a plaque or that sort of thing. I'm just going on the math, and I've noticed that it's closest to the Brazil Ranch site.
Right.
It's almost between the Brazil Ranch site and the Ragsdale. There's a guy named Jim Ragsdale who supposedly was camping and saw a craft impact fairly close to him. Mm-hmm. And we plotted it on a map, and we went out to the site this last July 4th, and I didn't find anything. And, of course, no one's supposed to find anything, and I don't think that's really the point of the whole crash itself. I think that what was embedded in it from the beginning was, I really do think something actually landed, and it was recovered pretty thoroughly. And it's because this was recorded, because this came out into public consciousness, that it's been able to adjust our paradigm of what we think about the possibility of the existence of extraterrestrial life.
Right, yeah.
And if they have any sort of connection with us, or they interact with us at all. And it's kind of strange to me to think that, okay, if this was an extraterrestrial event, why wouldn't we look for the same signatures of extraterrestrial intelligence that we were looking for with the SETI program? Why do we relegate it to this idea of it was a disaster? If it really was an alien craft, we must have somehow perturbed its navigational apparatus, and there's a couple of theories around that. And it crashed, or maybe a thunderstorm was too great for it, and it crashed, and so it was just an accident, and it was happenstance, or it was just a lie, and our government's covering up something else they were doing. Well, the geometry that's involved is not something that just happens. You can't pull together all these numbers, and this is my version of it. You can't pull these numbers together and come up with what it says in a consistent pattern. What's actually possible with the numbers is you can actually make a chain, an actual mathematical equation that will work both forward and backwards. An example, you can actually take the number of the latitude of the Roswell crash site. Just say 33.3. Multiply that times pi, and you'll get the longitude, 104. Now, that works in reverse. And if you take the number 1947 and you multiply it times 33.3, you end up with a really significant number. You end up with 664.8.
Oh, my goodness.
When I was talking about the precession of the equinox,
Yeah.
there's 6,480 years if you would quarter up that duration.
Okay.
So, in other words, every time you reach one of the cardinal points of our movement through the ecliptic, it'll take 6,480 years. If you, let's say you go back from, okay, let's take 2012 and go back 6,480 years, you'll end up in the realm of 4,400 BC, which just so happens to be the birth of ancient history, of civilization, of writing, of city building and architecture.
Which has sort of appeared out of nowhere. Yeah.
You want to go back another 6,480 years, you end up at about 10,500 BC, which is that mark between, in geology, the Pleistocene age and the Holocene age, which we're living in now. And in paleontology especially, the difference between one age and the next in geologic layers is die-offs, massive global destruction of flora and fauna, and it's all recorded in this layer of Earth at the margin between the Pleistocene and the Holocene. That's 2 cycles of 6,480 years. And what seems to be the agency for the destruction of all these things at the end of the Pleistocene is water. Even Darwin himself had said that the deposits that he found in, say, I think it was the Andean glaciers and some of the Siberian deposits, that are a matrix of twisted trees from tropical regions and temperate regions, found with hippos and alligators and muskox and a mammoth. You know, we're talking about animals that have been swept from the tropical regions through the temperate regions and deposited at the poles of the Earth and then frozen there. There's a lot of information about that, but that all happened at that margin between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, and that's 2 times 6,480. Just so happens that the sign of that actual point, there's actually a sign that the ancients, especially the occult ancients, knew, that pointed that out. We could know that it was going to it'd be that margin where this epic would finally end and a new one would begin. And it's the end of a 6,480-year duration. And that symbol is, strangely enough, a serpent with its tail in its mouth. Well, I've looked at it for like a number of years, and I actually realized that they're not just drawing this because it's a quaint symbol for, let's say, time that continues, but maybe you can point out that it, you know, it feeds on itself, so to speak. That sort of idea, that the Jungian sort of usurpation of the alchemical symbol of the, what's also called the Ouroboros, the serpent, the tail-eating snake.
This is who we are.
Yeah.
Millennium.
Yeah.
The Millennium Show. Yeah.
This idea of time and, you know, how time works. But the ancients were drawing a symbol of the Milky Way. And if you look at the Milky Way, and it's kind of hard to do nowadays with the light pollution in cities, but if you get a chance to look at the Milky Way and you look for galactic center, which was at a place where our ecliptic crosses. The ecliptic, where all the planets seem to travel and the sun seems to travel, that line crosses the Milky Way at 2 places. And it neatly bisects the Milky Way. But one of these places is perfectly in the center of where the galaxy would be. As you're looking kind of obliquely at the Milky Way galaxy, you're seeing a line that is the galaxy on edge, and the center is a bulge, and that's where the ecliptic of our orbit crosses, and all the orbits of the planets, and you see this strange sight, if you have a clear enough night, of a giant serpent's head with its tail in its mouth. And because that's what I believe they were alluding to, and I have some historical a lot of documents that actually point at the same thing and how long that actual duration was. I started looking into how that actually works. It's like a big cosmic clock. It's something that if you pay attention to, actually changes. The Milky Way isn't always static in our sky. It kind of undulates and moves around, because our Earth is rotating, of course. But what happens is, if you, once a year, and this has been happening for, as far as I know, thousands and thousands of years, once a year, the sun will actually rise in the mouth, or in the center of that galactic bulge, or in the mouth of this serpent. There's an ancient occult saying that says, the man who can divide the Ouroboros will have great power. Well, this is pretty amazing because there's a biblical connection. Did you know the name Leviathan? Levitan, actually, means divided serpent. Levi actually means connected serpent. Levi means connection or connected. And tanin means a long, thin, like snake. So Levitan is connected serpent. And part of the text that comes out of in Job, one of the questions God asks Job is, can you open the mouth of Leviathan? Well, very allegorically, if you look at it, how profound it is. He says, also God says, he's the greatest creature there is. He's greater than anything on Earth. There's nothing under heaven greater than him. And you're thinking about that. Well, that's kind of weird. Because I know that there's angels and there's actually hierarchies there. And how can he be the greatest creature that he's ever created? How can he spit fire, and how come he's impervious to any sort of weapon? Well, if you're looking at the actual word Leviathan and understand that the ancients actually viewed the Milky Way as a connected serpent, then it starts to make some more sense, at least symbolically. And it also makes sense when you realize that it was a huge component to explaining how the cycles of the Earth culminate. And of course, God being in charge of the cycles of the Earth would understand what the symbols would mean. And the big symbol is the sun rising in the center of this snake eating its tail, which is the Milky Way, every 6,480 years. And the way you can actually gauge this is it's falling along a time of the year, a day in the year, that will also align with our cardinal points of the year, say the solstice or an equinox. Now, there will be one day out of any year that you'll actually see the sun rise in the center of the galaxy. But the real symbol, according to the ancients, was when that had happened during a solstice or an equinox. And you can count on 6,480 years existing between each one of those movements. So it'll take 6,480 years from the sun to rise in the mouth of the Ouroboros or the Milky Way on, say, the winter solstice. You have to wait for another 6,480 years for it to actually rise in the spring equinox.
Okay.
And now, because this is actually a movement that takes place, it's so slow. 72 years for 1 degree of movement. You'll be able to see this now during our winter solstice, and it will be absolutely perfectly aligned on the winter solstice of 2012 AD.
Now, we made allusion to this in the conversation with Patrick Heron last week, that 2012 would be a significant year. Now, is there a connection between the Roswell crash that points to 2012 and this alignment of signs in the sky?
Oh, yeah, because now here's the real kicker. If you go to a calculator for distance, if you can plug in, like, say, the latitude and longitude for a coordinate on this Earth, and let's say you want to measure how far it is from the equator at 0 to 33 1/3 north latitude or south latitude, doesn't matter. Just 33.33 degrees in latitude.
Right, which is where the Roswell crash occurred. Okay.
Right. You will get 2,012.9 nautical miles.
Okay.
And when I say nautical miles, that's probably something that a lot of people have problems with. There's statute miles, there's kilometers and nautical miles. What's the difference? Well, NASA uses nautical miles, and anybody who's flying or navigating needs to use nautical miles, because it's not based on an arbitrary sort of set of number of feet to a mile. Nautical miles are based on a ratio of you have 360 degrees in a circle, and you have 60 minutes in an hour.
Okay.
So it's a time-space relationship. And you'll have 21,600 nautical miles around the greatest circumference of the Earth.
Okay.
Why? Because 60 times 360 is 21,600.
All right.
If you go to the moon, you're going to have 21,600 nautical miles around it.
Okay.
And all you're doing is timing how long an hour is and how many degrees are in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of navigating with a ratio between time and space was something that was very ancient. It's been around for a long time. It's not dependent on somebody actually going out and measuring, distances of the Earth or the object you're measuring it at the circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's just time and space in a relationship. And nautical miles are used then in space because it doesn't matter how far away you are from the Earth, you'll still be in the same relative nautical mile relationship on the ground based on this measurement. So you always know where you are in relationship to the Earth, and that's what it's supposed to accomplish. So if you're using nautical miles, 33.33 degrees north latitude, where the Roswell event occurred, is 2,012 miles away from zero, from the equator. Now, the other thing is, that number I was saying too, the symbol, or the actual duration of the aeon, which is the quartering up of time of the whole precession of the equinox, where our Earth has undergone cataclysmic cycle. That is, if you divide 648.06480 by 19.47,
okay,
you'll get 33.28. Now that's kind of an interesting number because it's not exactly at 33 1/3, and this gets really complicated, and I think deliberately so, because the end times are fairly complicated.
Yeah.
There aren't exactly just one event we're looking for. I mean, you can see the religion, the theology of Hollywood, say, talking about the end of the world. Well, as a Christian, the end times aren't the end of the world.
Right.
There's a lot of things that are happening before our Messiah comes back, but after that, there's a millennium, and I guess you could be an amillennialist or a premillennialist or, whatever. But there's a certain sequence of events that people are trying to pin down when they happen, where they happen in time. And even in eschatology and prophecy for Christians, it's a little complicated. So the math here can get really specific. So what I actually found out here then is if you take that number that's a signature of the aeon, I guess it's called an aeon, the actual length between each destructive epoch on the Earth, that's 6,480, and you just move its decimal place over, just one to the left, so now it's 648.0. Divided by 19.47, which is a universal constant, and you'll still get the latitude of the Roswell crash site with the deviation. Now it's at 33.28. Now if you move the decimal place over 2, so that it's 64.80, and you add 19.4, then you add 1947 to it. So actually it's the year of the Roswell crash, and you add 64.80. You end up in 2012. So happens to be the time where this alignment that I was talking about with the Ouroboros and the solstice, the winter solstice occurs. And it also is that number that 33 in its pure form, 33.33, equals that number 2012 in distance between, on the Earth as a function of the nautical mile equation. So you're seeing a repetition. You're seeing redundancy in this message.
Yeah. That is.
There's more to that too, of course, but it's so pictorial. It's something that if you don't see the picture and you don't understand, say, maybe what precession is all about, or that pi really is a circular type of number, and so on and so forth, it ends up just looking like I'm nuts.
That's a good way of putting it. I mentioned this to my dad some weeks ago, and Dad is an engineer by trade, and he tried to take it in, and then he just kind of shook his head and said, you run enough numbers together, and sooner or later you're just going to start seeing coincidences. So I don't think he quite got it. But
no, these are not coincidences.
Right.
They are not. You see a pattern over and over and over again. No matter how you approach it, you're getting the same answers.
Mm-hmm. And there's other things, too, that apart from just the Roswell event, you'll see, I'll say the number 2012 came up, it was probably made most popular by some archaeologists who were deciphering the Aztec and Mayan calendar.
Right.
And that's pretty interesting because the Mexico City history and the actual history of the Aztecs has an incredible Martian signature over it. And also, when you look at, the 19.47 and its Martianness, too, at least in contemporary sort of times, where the work of Richard Hoagland and others have been pointing out that there are ostensibly structures on a place called Cydonia that have this geometric relationship that's recorded redundantly also. You start seeing the pattern there again. And the really fast example, I don't know how much time I have, but I might be able to pull this one out. Okay.
Don't worry about it.
In Mexico City, it was actually a pretty recent history. The whole idea of the Aztecs moving into that area is not very clearly understood, but it is understood that it was founded, at least the founding city of I think it's called Tenochtitlan, was founded in 1325 A.D. And apparently, where these Aztecs lived before this time was around the southern part of where Texas is now. And one day, one of their prophets received a message from their war god, like Mars, only his name was Huitzilopochtli. And Huitzilopochtli told them, you need to move south. You need to migrate south to the place I will show you, which is with, the symbol is eagle, who has in his talons a serpent. When you see this symbol and it's perched on a cactus, that's where you're going to build your new city. So they moved south until they got to the latitude of 19.47 degrees. And they found this huge lake, like Lake Texcoco, which was basically a swamp with mosquitoes and everything. And they built their city in the middle of this swamp, which is, a place that you wouldn't think someone would migrate for hundreds of miles to build a place to live in, like it's a better place or something. No, it was a symbolic place, a place pointed out by their war god in 19.47. And there already had existed to the north pyramids that when they actually encountered the Maya who lived there beforehand said had always existed there, and a place where men become gods. And that's where the Pyramid of the Moon and the Pyramid of the Sun is now.
Okay.
Teotihuacan. Anyway, so they built this big complex in Mexico City, and that was in 1325. Now, their calendar ends in 2012 in December, 21st, on the solstice, right when this symbol, like I was saying, happens on the winter solstice.
Amazing.
And if you're actually going to count the number of solar years between the founding of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, and the end of their calendar, there will be 687 years. 687 days is how long a Martian year is. And if you look at one of the biggest UFO flaps in history, which happened in 1991 in Mexico City.
Mexico City, right.
There are 666 years from the founding of their capital. And what's really strange about this is the Mexicans themselves were looking at this huge UFO flap, which is continuing to this day, and saying, well, it's our sky gods, and they're heralding the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the plumed serpent, the one who flies in the heavens. And they're counting down to 2012.
That 1991 sighting, did that start in September?
I think it was in August, but I could be wrong.
Well, the reason I asked September is because September 11 of 1991 is when George Bush Sr. announced the dawn of the new age.
World Order, yeah.
New World Order.
It would make a lot of sense then, because you're looking at the repeating motif of 2012, a distance between in time from the founding of this Mexican capital. What's really strange, too, is how big a deal their calendar became in at least the occult circles around. You see it on the web all the time. You just punch in the year 2012, the Aztec Mayan calendar will come up.
Sure.
And nobody really knows how it works. It is pretty complicated. In fact, the Aztec inherited the calendar from the Mayan, and the Mayan had worked out the orbits of almost every planet to an unbelievable accuracy, and had managed to actually incorporate all these orbits into a calendar that it worked basically like cogs in a wheel. And as an explanation for it, you're looking at a calendar that's more accurate than any of the Western ones we've been using for hundreds of years. No one can say, well, they must have had this really incredible astronomical genius there, beyond Galileo or Kepler or even Newton at the time.
Yeah.
But no one says that, even though that's what you have to end up, coming up with.
Sure, and of course the fact that they built pyramids that looked an awful lot like the pyramids at Giza in Egypt, and of course the pyramids at Egypt, which were aligned perfectly to magnetic north, south, east, and west, and finished the blocks of stone, these huge blocks of stone, to within 10,000ths of an inch on all six sides, and moved them, blocks that are bigger than any earth-moving equipment today can handle. There are all kinds of anomalies that and what have been passed off to us as coincidences in all of these structures and calendars and numerology that's been handed down from years and years gone by, and it's just totally ignored by the world at large, and especially among the Christian community, as you mentioned, David, because of the fear that we're treading into astrology, which is something God is very clear that we stay away from. But it is really significant that we try to get a handle on this. Consider it intelligence gathering on the enemy, if nothing else. We'd like to keep on talking, but we're going a little long. This has been a really fast hour for us.
It has. David, let's say you got 2 minutes left. There are listeners out there who've heard this. They see that the signs are coming together for the end of the age. What do you as a Christian say to them?
Well, I can understand why people would be afraid to look at certain things that have significance, numerology, or maybe even just basic astronomy, because they've been told, these are pagan things and occult things and they're evil, and that's right. But they have to realize, too, that Satan doesn't invent anything. He hasn't ever had an original idea. He's only taking those things that exist as that are very important, and he attacks the things that are most important because he's efficient. You've heard that there's only one narrow path to salvation as a Christian, and that there are 100 million ways to try to save yourself and think that you're on the right path. The things that are most important to then Satan to distort are the things that are true, the things that have the most impact and power. The gospel, obviously, is number one, and then also the idea of our Messiah coming back again. And as a Christian, you have to look at what the enemy's doing, because the end time has a component to it that focuses on Christianity very precisely, and that's this idea that there's going to be a lie coming, a delusion. And if you're not well versed in what's going on, and especially the Word itself, and knowing it inside and out, and understanding that if someone throws something at you, it's not going to negate the facts in the Bible. And if you leave out astronomy, that's in the Bible. If you leave out numerics, that's in the Bible. If you leave out all these things and it talks about time cycles in heaven, that's in the Bible. It's been stolen and usurped by Satan. So you have to know that's there. Otherwise, the lie works. And that's basically what my website's been about, and what this work's been about from the beginning. And sometimes it's hard to actually keep that perspective, at least in the articles I've written and the work I've done. But that's what it's about. It's about leading people back to the truth and preparing them for the end.
That's right.
Well, how can people get more information on the work that you've done? What your website, and we didn't even mention your book on Cydonia and the monuments on Mars, and we'll have to have you back to talk about that. Where would people go to get more information?
Well, you can go to my website, and this is just kind of an extension of my website. You'll have to kind of go through the bullets that are on the left to actually get to the main page, and it's watcherwebsite.com. So on the World Wide Web, watcherwebsite.com. And when you get there, go to some of the articles, you'll end up with a list of the new things that are happening, and so I guess it's the update page. I have a book. It's called Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars. You can purchase it from that site. And we are going to get some copies of some DVDs of some of the lectures that I've done recently that talk about these things and more. And they're really image laden. There's a lot to see, and it helps in understanding because these concepts are so highly visually oriented that they're really necessary. But there's a lot on the site. It's a kind of a compendium for research in this sort of area. And there's like-minded connections and unlike-minded connections, just so you can get a perspective of what's going on in history. And as far as connecting there, then I think that's probably the easiest way to go.
Well, David, God bless you. You have put in so much work, and we thank you for it. We have just scratched the surface with David Flynn, but we guarantee you, folks, we'll have him back again, and we'll have him talk about that new book, the Cydonia book.
Yep, and we will put links to the article from Raiders News Update, which will give you all of the calculations showing the occult significance of the time and place of the 1947 Roswell crash. In other words, he shows his work. You don't just get the answers. You actually get to see the work to make sure they did it properly. We'll put a link to that in the show notes at our website, peeringintodarkness.com/radio. And again, David, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking with you more again, and perhaps taking up Patty Heron on his offer to visit him someday and have a couple pints of Guinness.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. God bless.
Oh, my gosh, my head exploded 3 times.
Yeah, it's, well, again, when I was in junior high, my geometry teacher never explained that it would really be useful someday out in the real world.
No, brain, head, tetrahedron.
Oh, it's all too much. We've got some guests coming up in the weeks to come that will also expand your mind. We will be talking next week with William H. Kennedy, the author of a book called Lucifer's Lodge, about satanic ritual abuse inside the Roman Catholic Church, as well as a new book he's got coming out about satanic crimes and its threat to society at large in the new millennium.
Oh, I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, it'll be a really dark show, so pay attention for that. Also, Dr. Henry Nyman is coming back in a couple of weeks.
Well, it's high time we had Henry back because there's so many things happening, sadly, over in the Vietnam and China, and now in Russia, Thailand. I mean, folks, the flu is really taking hold over there.
Yep.
And we've got to figure out what's going on, and Henry Nyman, he's the man to ask.
Yep. And we've got some other announcements coming soon about the possibility of us broadcasting live from the bunker and taking your telephone calls, but we'll confirm that. That'll be coming in the weeks ahead.
That's right. So if you have been sitting there itching to ask us questions as you listen,
like, are you guys ate up?
You guys are really odd. Here's your chance. We're going to be coming up on that soon, and we'll let you know as soon as we have the exact date of the first broadcast live.
Meanwhile, stay on top of the news. The mainstream media glosses over by checking in at our website, watchermagazine.com.
And if you want to ever contact us, we love reading your emails, and we do get emails. We get quite a few every week, and we're so happy to read them. We love the requests that some of you are making, and, well, frankly, some of those things aren't anatomically possible, so we just ignore those. However, you can reach us at radio@peeringintodarkness.com.
Until next time, remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
That's right. Hey, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Gonna step up to the microphone, say it loud and clear.